local man received commutation from President Trump before he left office. Corvain Cooper was serving a life sentence after getting a third strike for selling marijuana.
Tell me who wanna run with us. Mobbing back to back in them Bentley trucks. Blowing on that saucy to set me tough. I used to take that package, I would wrap it and send it up. Now I put money on your books until the day that you sent it up. One nigga Corvain said he living life after life.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Tons Talk. I'm Anthony Allegredi, the Chief Operations Officer, founder of the 40 Tons brand, where we believe no one should be in prison for a plant. We are actually filming live from Strains and Sounds in the San Fernando Valley, Canoga Park. We got my man Steven. Oh, that's filthy on the ones and twos, the microphones, the audio, the video. Big shout out to him. And today I got a really special guest today, man. Really good dude, very smart, business savvy. And I was like, you know what? I got to get him on the podcast. And so welcome to the show, Hirsh.
Anthony, thanks for having me.
Yes, man.
Happy to be here.
Man, happy to have you here, brother. So Hirsh, man, what tell the audience like what you do, you know what I mean, how you came into this industry, and like just a little bit about yourself and how you got started.
Yeah, I guess I can start with how I got into it. I mean, I think like a lot of us, cannabis has been part of my life for a really long time. I think that's pretty common in the space. I grew up in Northern California, started using cannabis at a very young age, probably younger than I should have. And like many people,
We all did it young,
right? Probably a little too young.
11.
You were a little younger than me. Gotta say that. But anyways, I mean, look, I could wax poetic about this for a while, but it opened up my entire world. I learned that everything I'd been taught about cannabis was inaccurate. I started to connect to my own roots. You know, I'm Indian American, but I was born, in this country. And so I started to discover that there was a great cultural history, that I was heir to, that was associated with cannabis.
Shiva.
And yeah, like the Lord Shiva.
The plant was for a gift for Shiva.
Absolutely. I mean, you said it well. You said it perfectly. So, and my parents had not really learned a lot of that because they had grown up in the generation that was impacted by the war on drugs. So anyways, that's a long-winded way of saying, I came to cannabis at an early age. I've been working in the space for the past 5 years as an attorney, and I can say more about that. But it was an early love, and there was a bunch of steps between now and then. But that's kind of the short story.
That's dope, dude. Okay, so man, your family's from India. Did you ever live in India? Have you ever been out there?
I go out there all the time, but I've never really lived there. My sister lives in Bombay. And
is that where you're from?
That my family is from two really small towns in northwest India. In Rajasthan.
Punjabi?
Rajasthan is actually the name.
But is it in the Punjabi region?
It's right around there. Yeah.
Okay, near Chandigarh.
Not too far. Yeah, not too far.
I love Chandigarh.
I mean, it's that's beautiful. The entire country is beautiful.
India's dope just as a whole.
Yeah,
I love India. Did I ever tell you that I've been to India?
Tell me more. Yeah, no, I don't think you have.
Yeah, dude, I love India, man. Okay. India's a credit, and dude, it's super hot. It's like 105 degrees and I'm in this long damn. It's hot. It's super hot. Okay. Like India. Mm-hmm. In fact, right now is the rainy season. Yeah. It's about to start, like August. Yeah. It gets real hot out there. Yeah. So I was in India. One of my first businesses I started in 2010. I mean, I've started businesses, I guess, back as 98, 99. Okay. But one of my like first major businesses, and I needed to do a website, and I had a Indian team. And I was like, let me go out there and meet these guys so that like I just don't get bullshitted. And I wanted to just really be boots on the ground. And so I met a dude, and we had been working, and I was like, let me fly out there. And I did, and he held me up for a week. I got to learn and be with Indian culture. I went to Mohali, which was right next to Chandigarh. Yep. And dude, it was super dope. Like India was just a dope place, and it was so funny. I wish I could find the clip, but I was trying to have him get me weed out there.
Yeah.
Totally. But what was funny was the weed. It's like it was taboo. You know what I mean? 12, 13 years ago, and still kind of is. But I couldn't really find anything good. It was some trash.
Yeah.
Right? Totally. So, and I have this clip where I'm clowning my guy. I was like, bro, come on, man. I thought this was where the hash and everything is at.
Totally. I mean, what you're saying is true. First of all, the world has long been fascinated by Indian culture, right? Like for a really, really long time. So it's no surprise that many of us are today. And like you said, cannabis is taboo there. But the great irony is, cannabis has a rich cultural history in India. And, a lot of the modern ideas of cannabis as medicine are just saying the same things that Indian culture was saying thousands of years ago, but in a different language. So, I mean, look, I could, as an Indian American, I think there's a lot of the cross-pollination between these two cultures, between America and India, is incredibly fascinating to me. They're the world's two largest democracies. I mean, I don't want to. I could wax poetic about that for a while.
But I want you to wax poetic on whatever you want to talk about.
To connect it back to cannabis, I mean, again, just going back to like how I came into the space. Again, like many of us, I started using cannabis at a young age. It did a tremendous amount for me, but then it also allowed me to lean into and learn about my own cultural history, which was really a beautiful thing. And so, I mean, part of, the name of my firm is Ananda Strategy, right?
What does that mean?
Yeah, so Ananda means bliss, like in Sanskrit, but really it's a homage to a couple of things. First, to anandamide, which was sort of the chemical compound that Raphael Moluccan discovered, right, when he was investigating the endocannabinoid system, right, which is sort of the compound that kind of gets us high. And it's basically a homage to sort of the South Asian experience with cannabis and sort of like, how I hope to play a role in this space, right? By spreading some of the wisdom that the plant teaches us in our modern society. So
I love it, man. I love it, man. I love the culture. I love, meeting folks that have been out there and then, also sharing my experiences of being out there. It was super rich in history and culture. I mean, just India as a whole just has, just because it's been around for so long, it's one of those ancient cultures where there's a lot of really dope things that come from out that way. So your family came out here. Where did they migrate to? What part of the country?
Yeah, my parents have a pretty fascinating story. I think it's like the quintessential American story. My parents were born in two small towns, right, in Rajasthan, India. Very poor. My dad was one of 14 kids. My mom was one of 19 kids, right? So like growing up in India in the 50s.
So you got like 34 aunts and uncles?
I have more than 100 first cousins. I'm serious, like facts. And I know all their names, so... and so, my dad was just smart and lucky enough to get a scholarship just at the time when the United States was opening up to immigration from Asia. I mean, it's all the kind of stars lining up, right? India becomes independent. There are, for the first time, institutions of higher education. My dad, from this dirt poor family, gets a college scholarship, gets to study in the United States.
Nice.
My parents' first day in this country, my mom's first day in this country was July 4th, 1976, which is like the bicentennial. So she just like rolls up to America and she's like, yo, like what's going on? So anyways, my parents immigrated here. I think classic Indian American story. And they bounced around America for 6-7 years before settling in California, though. They lived in Erie, Pennsylvania, Millsboro, Delaware, Lowell, Massachusetts, Cambridge, Ohio. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. All these little Rust Belt towns in the Midwest, and they
in the late 70s.
American. Yeah, in the late 70s, and I was born in '87, so I was born in California. I got two older sisters, and it just makes me proud that these two people from India that barely knew the English language moved over here, had an amazing time. Again, like living in Erie, Pennsylvania. That's like an old Rust Belt town, right? And they just describe how welcoming everybody was, and they soaked up the culture and. I'm kind of heir to that beautiful life that they created. And I grew up in the Bay Area, which is probably one of the most diverse parts of the U.S. And I don't know. I like
which part of the Bay?
Their story, the East Bay. So I grew up in sort of the Fremont area, which is like 20 miles south of Oakland.
Yeah.
I think probably like for many years, probably still the most diverse congressional district in the United States. I mean, my high school was like 20% Asian and like 20% Indian, right? And like 10% black. It was really like a sort of window into the future of America. And so that part of it was incredible. That's just kind of how I grew up. And it wasn't until much later in life when I started going, when I was a little older, started going to other parts of the country that I realized that was more unique. Yeah.
Did you get your
place to grow up?
You got your high school diploma in 2005?
2005. Yeah. Although I got arrested for a cannabis offense a few weeks before my high school graduation, and so that
it didn't deter anything, right?
Well, it's funny that kind of led me into cannabis. Like I was saying before, I grew to love cannabis, but then I got arrested at my high school prom.
How?
I was just kind of acting a fool. I had a bunch of weed in my pocket. I'm not saying I was doing the most virtuous thing, but I was just smoking weed like I did every other day. So, anyways, I got arrested, and it was really scary. At the time, I got suspended from school. I didn't know if I was going to be able to go to college, and thankfully, in part because I was a minor, I was still 17 years old. It's just funny how luck works. Like a lot of the worst consequences of that were shielded from me. Like 6 months later, it would have been worse, but I was still 17. And so when I went to college at Berkeley, I started doing criminal defense work in cannabis. I basically had an experience with how a cannabis offense could derail all these things. So for 4 years in college, I was the cannabis lead of the Berkeley Public Defender's Office, which basically means, if you were caught with cannabis, you wouldn't get kicked out of school. You would basically defend students that were accused of those cannabis violations.
Wow.
So it's all these experiences that come together,
That's
loving
dope.
the plant and then having the experience of the criminal justice system.
So what was going to Berkeley and like during that time? Like is it like everybody says it is in terms of like where all of like these counterculture movements start, and like just it's like a beacon for, and I don't want to say hippiness, but like all of that, those cultures kind of coming together, is it? And then with the business and attorney side kind of blending all of that.
Yeah, I mean, Berkeley, this is great. We're going down memory lane here. I like this. Berkeley.
I want people to know about you, man.
Yeah.
We'll chop business too.
Right. No, it's good.
Yeah.
I haven't got a chance to talk about this in a while. This is awesome. Berkeley was an incredible experience. As I mentioned, I grew up in the East Bay, so this was my home, right? I grew up 20, 30 miles kind of south of that, and I love the East Bay and the Bay Area. The reason I grew up reading about Berkeley a lot when I was a kid, I grew up reading about like the civil rights movement and the free speech movement. And the reason that was really interesting to me, again, just to kind of go down a rabbit hole, is it wasn't until 1965 that people from India could really immigrate to the United States, right? It used to be that they had a racial quota system in this country that basically privileged immigration from white Western European countries. And so it was, all the Indian American people in the United States today, their families came here after 1965. And it was only because of the civil rights movement that people finally said, wait a minute, we're finally making this a democracy. Our immigration system probably shouldn't be racist too. And so I had just grown up reading a lot about the civil rights movement and connecting it to my own story. And a lot of that has origins in places like Berkeley, where the free speech movement, in 1964, a great activist by the name of Mario Savio, and a bunch of those Berkeley students going down to Mississippi as part of something called Freedom Summer. So I guess that's a way of saying when I was a kid and I was trying to make sense of my American identity and I was growing up in the Bay Area, I would read a lot about Berkeley, and it meant a lot to me. So it was cool to then be able to go to school there. I
love school, man. I love just the fact that, it's a time of your part of your life where like you're coming into who you are. See, I went back to college late in life. I didn't go back till I was 30. So I'd already done 2 prison terms already. I'm already in the streets. I already got kids. And I said, you know what? Let me just figure out what I'm going to do. I had just gotten busted, or I had just gotten out of my 2nd prison term for a cannabis offense. And I was like, let me go back to college. So I went to UNLV, which is a little different. That's in Vegas, you know what I mean? Which was fun. But, and it was during the big tech era where they were kind of turning it into like a mini Silicon Valley. It was the downtown project with Tony Hsieh and Zappos and all that kind of stuff. So I was like in that tech bubble that Vegas had. But it wasn't quite, the Berkeley and Northern Cal. I grew up in Southern Cal, but like it didn't have that vibe of like just the Bay Area and the advocacy and that's where ground zero was for just like, kind of fighting back all these, bullshit movements, racism, the war, everything that was going on, when you were talking about when your parents came over. So it's just interesting to see and learn from people and hear about their college experiences. And I mean, you took a negative from, getting arrested at prom and flipped it into a degree in law.
Yeah.
You remind me of Suits. You ever seen that show, Suits?
A little bit, yeah. Sometimes people say that.
Dude, Suits is the bomb, bro.
Yeah.
I just started binging it. I literally just started binging it 3 weeks ago. I'm on season 5. Bullshit.
I gotta get on it.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Phenomenal, period. It's as good. It's as good as Billions.
Okay.
And Billions is, you seen Billions?
That's high praise, yeah. That's high
super
praise.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
But there's a guy, one of the main guys on there, he's a lawyer.
Okay.
And, but he's not. But he is, but he's not. And he reminds me of you because he got in trouble and then wasn't able to go to Harvard.
Oh yeah.
He wasn't able to go to school. You know what I'm saying?
Derailed,
But he still became like how successful you are. So it reminded me of the character. Yeah.
Good. Now I'm gonna check it out.
You got to go watch it, man. Suits is the bomb.
Yeah.
But okay, cool. So this is mid 2000s. Okay, let's see. What was cannabis like? That was still pre ICO. That was.
Yeah, although Berkeley still had it was one of the earliest to have these medical dispensaries. I used to live next to Bank of the Dank on Telegraph Avenue.
Bank of the Dank. Get your Bank of the Dank up,
you go on your Wi-Fi, you'd see the Bank of the Dank Wi-Fi. You're like, oh shit. Yeah, that's 2006. Yeah.
Dang,
Telegraph
man.
Avenue.
How long did Bank of the Dank last?
Honestly, I think Bank of the Dank, I mean, I don't know if it's still there, but I mean, it's kind of to your point, right? Like, it was obviously different than the way that retail dispensaries look today. It was not nearly as
Deli style.
Yeah, it was just open, and you got all kinds of shady characters, outside the door, but it was great, man.
Ironically, I grew up in this city.
Yeah, okay.
Right here, where this place is at.
Yeah, oh, really?
Canoga Park. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So from 0 to 11 years old, I lived here in Canoga Park, and then I moved to North Hollywood,
Yeah.
Van Nuys area, and lived over there.
So you're used to the heat,
I'm used to the heat. I don't like it though. I've been out of the heat though for years, dude.
Yeah.
And then I moved to Vegas, and I was
gonna
in.
say,
Dude,
talk
Vegas.
about the heat.
Vegas is terrible, terrible heat.
Hey, they got pools though, so.
They got exactly. But no, but it's hot as hell in the valley.
Yeah.
But now I'm in San Diego.
Okay.
So and I'm by the beach.
Oh man, San
and
Diego, that's the dream right there.
It's the dream, dude. I've been down there for about 7-8 years now, and I love it. It's raised my kids there. It's nice.
It's the dream. It's so nice. I really like the Amtrak from LA to San Diego. I don't know if you've ever taken it, but it's so nice.
It's perfect, bro. It's perfect. It's a straight shot.
Surliner, yeah.
Yep. So like, okay, cool, man. So you do that, and then when did you decide to become an attorney? Because your first 4 years, you said that you were like involved in the organizations that were about law, but you weren't a lawyer yet.
Yeah.
When did you decide to like, okay, I want to actually go to law school?
Yeah, so those years at Berkeley developed my interest in criminal justice work, and I'll be totally transparent. Around that time, Barack Obama was running for president. I was like, this guy seems pretty cool.
2009, okay.
Yeah, like my senior year of high school, 2008, 2009. And he had gone to law school and had done some interesting things. I mean, I'm kind of half joking, but only half joking, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh, maybe I'll go to law school too. So anyways, my senior year, I applied to law school, and then I went right afterwards and sort of continued a lot of the work that I was doing in criminal justice.
Where'd you go to law school at?
Harvard. Yeah.
You got Harvard. That's right. Oh, you really are Suits then.
There you go. Yeah, I guess so.
They only allow. Have you seen Suits, Steven? Oh, dude, Suits is the bomb, man. I'm binging it back.
Yeah,
like,
I'm going to now,
I'm on
bro.
5. I'm on
3 weeks in.
Yeah, and I've only probably watched it 8 days out of those 3 weeks. Okay. Like where I've sit to like watch it because I'm so busy. I'm in love with it.
Next
dude.
time you see me, I'm gonna be ahead of
yes,
you.
Yes. It's 8 seasons, so you know it's a good show.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But okay, so you go to Harvard. What was that like? So you were in Harvard. No, you were Harvard post Zuck.
I started Fall 09.
Fall 09. Okay, so
I
you
graduated from college May 09, and then I went straight afterwards. I moved to Boston 2 months after that, July 09.
Man, what's Harvard like, dude?
It was a great experience. It was incredible. It was my first experience with cold weather. That part of it was tough. Boston is cold. That I learned I was a Californian truly when I lived in Boston for 3 years. So I was like, I don't know.
I know your parents were laughing because they're like, we've been. They were all throughout that area.
Totally. Yeah. Exactly. It was a great experience, man. I made so many great friends, and I got to continue the work that I was interested in. So I did a lot of work on the war on drugs when I was there. I got to work with two people in particular. So there's this guy named Charles Ogletree, who's a great race and criminal justice scholar. The reason he's known is he's the first legal scholar that has pursued reparations in the courts, right? So pretty interesting guy. He was also a mentor to Michelle and Barack Obama when they were students there. So I got to do a lot of work with him on the racially disproportionate impact of the war on drugs, and got to write a paper with him. And I got to work a lot with another woman named Lonnie Guinaire, who basically was critical to the extension of the Voting Rights Act. Used to be a lawyer for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. So
wow.
I basically just got to work with two pretty iconic scholars, and it was great. Got to continue my interest in this work.
Do you know Seema?
I know many Seemas. As an Indian American, I know a few.
Oh, she's out of India. Out of India. She's out of the East Coast, Washington, D.C., New York. Big attorney that's also like on the front lines of, I don't know if she's an attorney or she works with attorneys, but she definitely has been part of legislation and like the stuff you were just talking about. So I didn't know if you had known her or not. She's a G.
Yeah.
She's like, do you know Amber Littlejohn?
I do.
She's like that.
Got game. I like Amber a lot. She's got game. Yeah.
Amber's a monster.
What I appreciate about her is like she has her eye on equity and advancement, but there's a hard-nosed pragmatism. And look, I don't even really know her that well. This is just from my observation.
She's cool as shit, man.
She's got game. So, I have a lot.
Big shout out, Amber, man. We love you. Amber Littlejohn. You're in Harvard, you're crushing it, you're doing your thing, you're pushing it. And like, what made you, I'm sure you could have gotten like to one of the big firms.
Yeah.
But you decide not to go that route?
Yeah, I mean,
you decided to go to the route of like going back to Cali and really being on the front lines. And I know you're with Normal and a couple of other organizations. Is that kind of how it went, or did you actually go work in the corporate field?
Yeah, it's interesting. So it was a great experience. I learned a ton there, but it's kind of a fishbowl there. And everybody, or a lot of people who go to that school, want to become fancy corporate lawyers. And I met a lot of people who were doing that, and they didn't really seem that happy. So I knew that's not what I wanted to do. So I decided after I graduated from law school, instead of becoming a lawyer, I worked at McKinsey, which is the consulting firm. So I did that for a couple years. And do
you know Hilda?
I don't.
Hilda Kraga?
I don't know.
Oh, she's out of McKinsey, but she okay, but go ahead, keep going.
Yeah, it was a cool experience, man. I mean, I basically got to learn an entirely new skill set, and I got to work in what is called their public sector practice. So we did a lot of work with the Obama administration on just making government more efficient. And yeah, it was kind of corporate. It was kind of like sort of stuffy, but I learned a ton in those couple of years.
But McKinsey's like the best.
Yeah, it was quite a place. In New York, actually.
They're consultants, but what's the proper word for McKinsey?
Management consultant, strategy consultant.
But they're the best. Like they poach all the best people from all over the world. Like the lady Hilda, she's now the CEO of the largest African job board in Africa.
Yeah.
But she came through McKinsey.
Yeah.
And everybody that I hear that goes through McKinsey is like Hirsch's. But imagine having like 200 Hirsch's working at your spot, bro. It's game over.
Sounds like a lot, right? It's a cool little network. Honestly, they attract a lot of pretty interesting people with different backgrounds, right? And they sometimes take chances on. I mean, if I can be totally real, right? They do a lot of business advising. I had a law degree. I didn't really have business, right? Advising people. I was like a 24-year-old kid, and yet they identify people that they think have some talent, and they allow them to sort of do this job. Basically, what I'm saying is I learned a lot through that experience. More than probably the value I was adding. But
one of my partners, Brandon, I can't remember if you met him or not, but he's with 40 Tons Careers.
Yeah.
He was with PwC.
Yeah.
Which is like a McKinsey kind of.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he was telling me about how just you operate at the highest levels and you learn game and you learn knowledge. Like I'm really. I never went the corporate route other than like corporate things that I built for myself, which is still entrepreneurship. But like, I really respect the Suits, the Billions, the shows like that, the McKinseys, the PwCs, like working in Wall Street, high level attorneys, high level bankers, high level investment people. Like I really love that. Cause like, that's where the game is at. And like, and it's where like the game is played.
Yeah.
In DC and New York and like all these circles that you have kind of been in. It's like, this is where the game is played.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, totally. To that point, as you were saying that, I was thinking about it, right? We're talking about why you make certain decisions. As I think back to why I decided to work there, when I was in law school, I did a lot of human rights work, right? Which was cool. Basically, there would be human rights conflicts around the world, and we would write about them, we would chronicle them. And I was really idealistic when I was in law school. I was like, okay, like we'll make a difference in Thailand or in South Africa. But then I would think to myself, okay, so Harvard is flying me out to these countries for whatever cost, right? I'm writing this report. It's kind of sitting on a shelf. And so I started to become skeptical about a lot of that. And I thought to myself, right, again, I'm just thinking back to what the sequence of events, like to your exact point, you have to kind of get into the rooms where power is happening. Otherwise, you can just like sort of think that you're doing something significant. And so that's what led me to be like, all right, let me see what the game is here, so to your point. So,
no, that's awesome, man. I really like, I've been a student myself my whole life. I love learning. I've read 500-600 books. I've got my bachelor's degree and my master's degree post 3 prison terms, which is its own education in and of itself. I always say that I got my PhD first.
Yeah.
After high school, I got my PhD in the streets in the system. Then I went back to school and got my bachelor's and master's.
Facts,
so
right?
I always, make the little joke like that. But I'm just fascinated of going to these different places because I've been to these places as a cannabis dealer or as someone that's not in these circles, but I've connected to it because of the hip hop industry or this or that, but I've been close to it. And knowing the Hirsches or the Ambers of the world during the different times of while I've been an adult in these different places like New York, DC, where the power is at. And it's just observing it. And it's like, man, this plant kind of, it got me in trouble. So like, I think like, what if I would have went to Harvard, right? But then at the same time too, this plant also brought me back full circle to now 40 Tons and doing the good work that we're doing. So like, it was a different path. And then I got derailed and having to go to prison. And then my partner Corvain getting a life sentence over the plant. It's like, I just start, it's interesting talking to someone like you who's been in these different places and just learning, from what you've learned, so
it's amazing your journey has come full circle, I mean, right. It's crazy. And it's fortunate that it has come full circle. You know what I'm saying?
You had to go through the bullshit to get to the other side, but now we get to do podcasts about our lives at a cannabis festival where they're smoking weed outside right now. Right. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't get better than that. But at the end of the day, we always have to make sure that we have to fight and make it aware that there are people still locked up over this plant. And so I always want to make sure we do that. Before we go on to the next segment, I just want to give a couple quick shout outs. Big shout out to High End Graphics, man. They've been doing my graphics for literally the last 2 years. If you reach out to them, highendgraphics.com, you get 50% off. I got to give a big shout out to my people over at Hemper. Hemper is one of the largest, Hemper.
I do.
They're one of the largest e-commerce cannabis accessories business, so big shout out to them over there. And then my guy Owl's Oil, he's always making some good hemp products. And then this isn't my product, but it's a new product that I just got, but it's my boys over at Josh Wax. This isn't a paid nothing, this is just me giving love, but this is some fire. Steve, let me see if you can get it. Oh, have you seen that before? That's weird. That's a different type of thing.
Always getting more complicated.
Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. Let's see if you get it. That's some fire right there. How do you consume?
How do I consume?
Do you consume weed or do you do edibles? What do you do?
Well, historically, right? Like growing up, it was always flower, right? I mean, historically. So when I was younger, I always used to consume out of a pipe, to be honest with you.
Okay, me too.
Which I rarely do anymore, Now I prefer dabbing.
There's tons of dabs out here.
I saw that.
You're going to get a gang of dabs.
Yeah.
Okay, so you do the dabbing?
Yeah, I mean...
Does that fuck you up, though? Like, to the point where now, like, you can't even do flower? Because it's like, it's so concentrated, like, now you can only deal with that. It's like...
I don't dab enough to do that, but it just, there's a purity of the experience, and I'm attracted to the idea that it's, like, it can be one of the most pure ways to consume cannabis, right?
Okay.
Like, just like hash, like, in general.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in that idea, I mean, flower is classic, but, sometimes I don't want my house stinking or, or whatever.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you, man. No, but these dudes at Josh Wax got some fire product. This is what I've been smoking on for the last couple of days. What's your favorite strain?
I don't know, man. I don't know if I have. For me, cannabis is like wine. I just know I love it.
Are you a wine drinker?
I am, but not like a super discerning wine drinker. If that kind of makes sense. I just know I really enjoy it. Like if it smokes good, I like it. I'm a simple man. You
kind of shared a little bit about your growing up, your path, your journey. You get to the Bay post Harvard. You get back. Tell us about how like you got into normal. Tell us how you got like really your foot really into the cannabis industry where you realize like, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing like forever or at least until I want to.
Yeah. So I moved back to the Bay Area, and before I worked in cannabis, I worked at Airbnb, which was like one of the best career experiences that I had. And I was just lucky to join them at the right time. And my job was to build out their policy legalization framework, right? It's actually quite similar to cannabis in that this was growing rapidly around the world, like a lot of sharing economy companies. And my job was to negotiate their legal and policy agreements. So I got to do that for a few years, which was negotiate every major policy agreement that Airbnb...
And non-cannabis. This is just policy just in general for housing.
Straight up policy, right? Exactly. Basically to build a legal framework around this, right? Like there were hotels, but there was no legal or regulatory framework for this thing called short-term rentals, right? I mean, just like Uber came out of nowhere, so did Airbnb. So, I mean, that was an awesome experience. I got to negotiate the policy agreements in San Francisco, LA, in a lot of cities in Western Europe. I got to live in Japan for a short amount of time and legalize Airbnb there. So I did that for a few years. This was around the time that California was legalizing adult use, and I just knew I had to get into cannabis. And so for a while, I was just strategizing and scheming about how I would get in. And I had this idea that the same thing that I did at Airbnb I could do in cannabis, right? In other words, convincing these cities to build a legal framework around this activity that was very popular, yet had its critics, and suggesting that if you regulated it, then it would be beneficial for cities, and comparing different policy frameworks that would allow this to succeed. And so that was my thesis, and I applied to every cannabis company out there. I tried to work for everybody, right? I was like, hey guys, like, I know I don't have quote unquote cannabis experience, but I love the plant. I'm a pretty smart guy. This is the stuff I've done before. Like, please, like, hire me. Like, trust me. I want to. And everybody said no, right? Like
2012, 2015.
No,
when was this?
This is 2017. Right?
2017.
This is like right after California legalizes, passes Prop 64, but before adult use sales start. So
Got it.
I'm working at Airbnb in San Francisco. I got this great job. It's awesome. They're flying me around the world, and it's pretty dope. Like, I love to travel like most people, right? And I believe in this idea that you should be able to live in cool places. So I'm loving it, but I'm like, hey, this cannabis thing is taking off. I got to get involved. So, I mean, long story short, I mean, every major California cannabis operator that's out there, I tried to work for them. You know, like, I got to the final round for head of government affairs at Ease, and they said no. Weed Maps said no. They're like, hey, man, do you know CEQA? And I was like, I know it's a law. I'm sure I could read it, you know. Anyways, things have a way of working out. So after 10 no's, MedMen finally took a chance on me because I had negotiated the Airbnb law in LA, and MedMen was this new high-flying cannabis company that was based out of LA, and they're like, okay, well, you know what it is to mix it up with the city of LA. So that was my first jump into cannabis. And even though that place was kind of chaotic, like, it ended up being the best thing that could have happened to me based on who I met there and blah, blah, blah. So anyways, that was kind of my step in, is when they finally took a chance on me, which I appreciate, which I really appreciate.
Dang. So they all said no to you. What do you think the reason for that was? Do you think it was because you didn't have the cannabis experience? But little did they know it was like they made a big mistake.
I mean, I think so, right? I think that, like, I'm still here standing, right? You know, I think there's a randomness to the hiring process sometimes. It's really hard to hire people, you know?
Yeah, but your role is not a role that a lot of people are, like, going after.
Yeah. I was disappointed, right? At all of these places, like, you know, when I heard about Ease, for example, right? I was coming from the tech world. And so the Ease idea, like in 2016, right? That
Genius idea,
right? You're like, okay, that's what it's going to be, right? And so that was my dream job 7 years ago. And so when I got to the final round for the head of government affairs and I didn't get hired, I was like, damn, that's it. So it's just funny because things have a way of working out, right? Like you know, so it all.
And then Weed Maps too. My buddy used to be the one of the heads of government affairs, Cedric. He was there's the VP of government affairs, and then he was the person right under that person. Or I think he was the VP of government affairs, but then there was someone above him. Yeah. But he was the VP at Weed Maps. Did you know him or no?
I didn't know him. What was interesting about them is they historically have had a big policy team, which Airbnb did. And so again, the reason why, I was fixated on Weed Maps, I mean, think about this. Weed Maps was the perfect fit, so I thought, because Weed Maps, like Airbnb, was a platform, right? Like,
correct.
I had direct experience with regulators saying, hey, you have these like illegal Airbnbs on your platform. What is your liability as a platform? That's literally the same issue that Weed Maps.
Same exact issue.
It's like, hey man, you got this illegal listings on.
Yeah.
So I was like, dude, I know this. Like, you should let me do this, you know?
And they said no.
And they said no. So yeah, and you know, another great example of this was Flow Canna, right? So Flow Canna at the time, right, and again, the idea was so beautiful. It's like, you know, we will through scale leverage the collective competencies of these Northern California farmers. But I didn't know CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, and that was a big part of their hiring process. Was like, have you had prior experience working with CEQA? And I was like, I'm sure I could learn it, you know.
And you did?
So I mean, that's I think part of the reason they didn't hire me, But so MedMen ended up hiring me, and again, like, obviously anyone familiar with the industry knows how chaotic.
And you're building the industry.
Yeah.
So there's no framework for you to go off of for this. You could go off of what you did at Airbnb for the most part, but there's nothing like this in the world.
Yeah.
It's fresh.
It's totally new.
Like, this is new territory.
It's totally new territory. Yeah, facts, exactly. Which is obviously why we work in this space, and it's so exciting.
Yeah.
But anyways, I got hired by MedMen in 2018, and that ended up being the best thing that could have happened to me, because I joined that company during the time of what you might call irrational exuberance, when they had capital, they had just gone public, and were pursuing all these licenses. So during the first year of adult use sales, like, because I worked for the company with the biggest footprint, I got to engage with policymakers in every single city in California. And like 6 months went by, and I had like just this incredible policy knowledge. I got to work on the Arizona ballot initiative that legalized cannabis there, just because they were the big dog at that time. And they were like, all right, dude, you're a guy on the West Coast, like you're California, Nevada, and Arizona. And so, I mean, all these cities like San Francisco, right, Long Beach, LA, you know, San Diego, like I got to see them take shape. And
wow.
And so it was, it just ended up working out perfectly. And the other thing I'll say is, obviously, you know, that place has gone through some turnover, but the people I worked with there are some of the best people. Like, by which I mean, this was one of the first companies that could attract a lot of talent, right? Because they had the money to do so. So, I mean, I could list off 24 people that I worked with there that are continue to be good friends of mine in cannabis. And, you know, the network is the net worth. So, you know.
100%. I mean, it's a shame that different companies go through different transitions and certain things happen and cause them that, you know, the company to not be what it was under former leadership or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. You know, MedMen had an opportunity. I mean, they, you know, they've got their fair share of black eyes in the, you know what I mean, in the industry. And, you know, I don't know any of them personally. You know, when all this stuff was going down, we were still, you know, dealing with just getting my friend out of jail. So we were selling weed in the, you know, in the traditional market, right? But as far as like compliance, that didn't really come down until we got Corbin home. Yeah. What was it like in those early days? Was it the like, not Wild Wild West, but was it like, you know, in 2017, 2018, you know, for the folks that are just coming to the industry, like what was it better then, worse then? Was it more wild then? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
There was a little bit more optimism then, right? It was definitely the period of of irrational exuberance where there's a lot of capital flowing into the space, and when everyone thought they were going to conquer the world, like,
good word,
quickly, right? Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is, it's still the wild, wild west, right? So, like, you know,
good point.
It's still crazy out here, you know? So, I guess one more difference is that there was more optimism because the gold rush was in fuller swing.
More money,
right?
But pre-pandemic,
right? For sure. I think one of the unfortunate thing is that period absorbed a lot of the capital, which, to your point, was not always deployed well. There's a limited number of investors and capital in the space, and one of the things that we've seen is when a lot of those folks get burnt or are underwater, then it prevents people. Then it prevents people from now getting capital. So, yeah, I mean, it was crazy. Again, I would say the best thing is just being able to be here and watch it all take shape.
What made you leave?
So I was at MedMen for 6 months, and I just understood that that it was just not a company set up for long-term success. And so I was the West Coast Director of Government Affairs at MedMen, and I got the chance to be the head of Government Affairs for the first time at Caliva.
Okay, over there with Dennis?
That's over there with Dennis, yeah. Dennis and Steve hired me. This was almost exactly 4 years ago. Right now is when I joined Caliva. I remember it was July of 2019.
Okay.
And I appreciate that because I was still relatively young. I was like 30 years old, and they hired me to be their head of government affairs because, you know, this is a nascent space. And look, they took a chance on me. And so I really appreciate that. Yeah.
And they got that, what was it? 500 million or something. I forgot what they raised.
They raised a ton of money.
They raised something stupid
they
crazy.
Raised a ton of money. Yeah.
That was another one that unfortunately all these big ones got hit, man, because what was the word you used? Irrational exuberance. Yeah. That's exactly the word for what this industry is, and us overspending and not realizing that it isn't just CPG like everything else.
Totally. Yeah.
It's culture.
For sure.
You know what I mean? It's there's a lot more to it than just packaging it up and selling it. And unfortunately, those big companies did take a lot of the money out of the industry, and now we're seeing the suffering of it. But I think, you know, the ones that have the gusto and the prowess to stay in the game, the ones that are, you know, being scrappy, the ones that are really trying to do this, and I think the ones that really care are the ones that are going to be around.
Yeah.
You know, you get into this industry, you become head of government affairs, but then, like, how did your advocacy work start? You know, what made you want to join Normal? What made you want to, you know, really push it on the, you know, on the equity side?
Yeah, totally. I really enjoyed my work working for those big companies. As time went on, I found myself wanting to do more advocacy work, right? Or to have more freedom to do that advocacy work. And so working at those big companies allowed me to see the policy environment in a lot of cities. Yeah, I just found myself being drawn more and more towards advocacy. So I joined Normal, and I think that's ultimately what motivated me to start kind of my own firm, so I could do both advocacy work and be a little more free. But I guess another way of putting this is I would notice a lot of cities in California making the same mistakes, right? And I would notice a lot of policy failures. And I wanted more freedom to be able to call attention to what I saw as those regulatory failures. And working for a company, you were always handcuffed to some extent and how honest you could be. So working for those companies was awesome because it was a great opportunity to, you know, understand the policy in all these cities and meet all the people and build up your network. But unconsciously, I always thought to myself, okay, like working for these big companies can be a vehicle to learn a bunch of stuff, to meet a bunch of people, to build a brand. And then if you have something to say, then maybe you can start your own firm, service clients, but also be your own man. And so you can call attention to policy challenges. So, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of what motivated me to do what I do. And yeah, as you mentioned, I'm on the board of Cal Normal, and we do a ton of advocacy work, like many of us do, and it's great.
Do you work with Ian?
I do work with Ian. I mean, Ian, I've learned a lot from Ian.
Corvain's pulling up right now, so he's texting me. That's why I'm trying to get him to. But yeah, Ian's awesome, dude. I love Ian. He travels the world. He goes everywhere. He has a great laugh.
Ian teaches me to be more bold. You know, like Ian will go and introduce himself to anybody, and it's like, yeah, that's how you do it.
All right, we had a quick little intermission of Tons Talk, 40 Tons. We're here with Hirsh Jain. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Yep, Hirsh Jain of Ananda Strategy. Big shout out to Hemper, Owl's Oil. These are our sponsors of our podcast. Also, big shout out to Stephen O. That's filthy. We actually got a phone call coming in from Corvain. Hold on one second. Corvain, I got you on speakerphone. You're in the podcast.
Where are you talking about? The middle is where's the middle at?
The middle of what?
I'm in the back.
You're live on the podcast right now.
Yeah, I know. I'm saying, what part are you at?
I'm in the room filming the podcast way in the back. So you won't be like way back right, but you won't be able to come in until after we finish. But we'll be done in about 15 minutes.
Cause I'm in the back where the pup portraits.
Yeah, exactly, right there, right where our table is. You can see our table.
Where's the table?
Right next to puff portraits. To the left. It's orange.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. You just interrupted the podcast, man.
Oh, man.
I got you on the podcast, and you're interrupting the podcast, man. All right. So that's funny. So, okay. So your advocacy work is more on the policy side.
Yeah.
Right. Really like helping with policy work. Like, and I love that. And, cause that's like the opposite of what we do. We always say we're not on the policy side. We're just some guys that are taking our second chance to go and do something with it. But where we can have impact is like creating programs, creating these conferences, creating these, these opportunities to do the education, expungement, empowerment, employment all together, and just help folks get jobs, help folks level their careers up, and do these kinds of things. So then you come together with the policymakers, and we actually can make a dent in this industry.
Yeah.
I know sometimes it feels like, we're running up a brick wall. You know what I mean? We're running into a brick wall. We're on a hamster wheel in this industry just as a whole, the tumultuous supply chain.
Yeah.
Dealing with, raw inventory at a certain price, and a month later it's 50% less. How do you deal with a supply chain that completely changes like that, that's heavily regulated, taxed? What do you do?
Yeah.
Especially when you're a California brand, right? You got to survive in California, but the goal is to extend, so entering some of these new states, because you keep California as your brand, but then you try to figure out ways where you can make money in other states. So like, tell us about, what are some of the newer states that are coming on, and what are you excited about? And, maybe some things you can share.
Yeah, I mean, totally. And to your point, it's really hard to operate in this space. California is probably the hardest place to operate. The way I think about it is the federal government makes it hard enough through its tax policies and its banking policies that you need a state to have good policy to even have a chance, right? Like, the federal government makes it so difficult that the only way you can really have a chance is if the state has good policy, and California doesn't, for all the reasons you mentioned. And so that's why these policy discussions are important, right? Because, to put it frankly, there are more and less fucked up states, and the goal is to make things less fucked up, right? In terms of states, a couple I'll mention are Missouri and Maryland, just to start. I think they're interesting. These are two of the states that came online this year, that started adult use sales this year. Missouri, I think, is really interesting. It started adult use sales about 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. It already is on track to be a $1.5 billion market. It's exciting, I think, for a bunch of reasons. First, it shows that Republicans smoke weed too, right? It's the first big red state to legalize adult use, so that's pretty interesting and is significant. It also borders a bunch of states, right? It's right there smack in the middle of the country, 7 of which are prohibition states. So you have people from Kansas, from Iowa, from Arkansas, right? From Memphis, Tennessee, driving into Missouri. I mean, if you look at a map, it'll really hit you. Like,
it's right
there's a lot of people that live right there. So it has this big normalizing effect. And it also, again, I know it's a red state, but because it's a red state, it's a little bit less fucked up than California. it has a much lower tax rate. It's like a 6% state tax and a max 3% local tax. You can see and smell the product, right? They don't treat it like it's plutonium. You can see and smell it before you buy it, like it's like you're in a grocery store, right? There are drive-throughs. Delivery is allowed immediately, right? And so, that's why this state is performing well. So it's a good example of how, in states across the country, you can have really successful cannabis policy. So Missouri is a good one. The other one that I think is exciting is Maryland. So Maryland just started adult use sales on July 1st.
Shout out my guys Remedy out there.
Oh yeah, you know those guys? I've heard them on podcasts and I read about them. They seem pretty dope, and they got a
my guy Mitch. Big shout out,
right?
Mitch.
Yeah.
Mitch from Remedy.
Yeah, they've been running that for like 10 years or something, right?
Have you
For
been
a
to
long
their
time.
location?
I haven't. I really wanted
Columbia?
to go to Maryland on day one of adult use sales just to be like, what up, guys? Like, how's it going? But I didn't make that happen, unfortunately. You and me got to go out to Columbia. How
We
about
will.
that? Yeah.
I'll introduce you to them. I'll take you to their spot.
Cool.
Their spot's phenomenal.
Dope.
And ironically, there's an Indian food restaurant right next door.
Hey, then I'm there. For reals.
Won't take you there, Mitch, because I know you don't like that spot. It's an inside joke, but we know you don't like it, Mitch. But yeah, Maryland's is looking to be real interesting.
It's super interesting. It's performing really well. And again, not to get too nerdy here, but like, why is Maryland super exciting? Well, first of all, it borders a bunch of prohibition states. So you have people from Pennsylvania, from Delaware, from Virginia, from D.C., from West Virginia, all driving into Maryland. It has the same normalizing effect as Missouri, so that part of it is exciting.
D.C. is there.
D.C. is right there, right? And D.C. has legal. I mean, as we all know, they kind of have this weird semi-legal economy, but yeah, DC is there, right? So you got a
71.
bunch of people driving there. They have a low tax rate of 9%, and this is wonky, but this is what matters, right? This impacts whether people buy in the legal market. Another thing, Maryland has the most federal workers of any state in the country, right? Like of any state in the country, the most federal employees live in Maryland.
Makes sense because of D.C.
Because of DC, right? And that has a huge normalizing effect. Like those kind of things really matter. And so little things like when I read the Washington Post these days, they have headlines that say, cannabis is now legal in Maryland. Can my employer test me? The fact that in the paper of record in our nation's capital, those kinds of headlines are being written is incredibly significant. Other things, right? Like, and I think these things matter. Like Maryland, if you look at it, like I-95 just cuts through the heart of Maryland. Mm-hmm. That is the highest trafficked highway in the United States. Like that highway sees the most cars. Like, and people who know that part of the country know people who have relatives in North Carolina who come up to Maryland over the summer. It really opens up
the whole Bible Belt.
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So Maryland is exciting, and again, we could do the whole hour just talking about these states, but maybe one more. Yeah, go ahead.
Are you working in these states? Are you doing any strategy there, or
which ones are we talking? Missouri and Maryland? Not really. Those aren't two states I'm working in. I'm just really fascinated by them. You know, I do work in Ohio, Arizona, Oregon, Michigan, all interesting markets. California, but these two I think are cool states. And then the other one is Florida. That I think is really exciting.
Florida's interesting.
Yeah, Florida's Ohio and Florida I think are the two big ones. These are two big red states that will likely have ballot initiatives over the next 12 months. And I think if those two states go adult use, that will kind of be the tipping point. Right now there are 23 states that have legalized adult use. Ohio could be the 24th in November, and Florida could have a ballot initiative this next November. So.
Without getting like political or anything like that, but I just want to hear your opinion on it. And for those out there, you know, you mentioned the red states, right? But red states get a bad rap for everything, right? You know, just being red gets you, you know, being on the right, you know what I mean? Being conservative tends to get you, you know, it's just not looked at as the best, right? But then you see policies, you see industries maybe not thriving, but thriving a whole lot better than their counterparts. Why do you think there's such a disconnect there? Do you think it's, you know, like, does it have to do with, you know, institutional racism from back in the day? Or what do you think is that? Because you would think if it's a red state and they're doing what you need to do to have a successful market, well, why aren't there more people supporting that?
Yeah. I mean, first I'll say you mentioned red states getting a bad rap, right? Like there's a lot of policy choices that I don't
Well, Republicans.
Yeah, Republicans, right? I mean,
You know?
look, I grew up in the Bay Area, right? I wouldn't feel comfortable living in a red state. Like, again, to each their own, but like guns, that's never made sense to me, right? Like, and there's a long list there. So with that being said, although policy choices in red states make me uncomfortable, what I do know is that to get anything through the United States Senate, like any kind of meaningful progress, you're going to need 60 votes, which means you're going to need Republican senators. So, I'll get to your question in a second, but one of the encouraging things about red states coming online, no matter what, is that means that there are Republican senators that are more likely to be pro-cannabis in the Senate. I mean, to be really specific, right? Missouri. Now that Missouri has a bomb cannabis economy, there are 2 senators, Eric Schmidt and Josh Hawley, who are deep red Republican, suddenly are cool with cannabis now that it's a $1.5 billion industry. It's funny how that works. Whereas Josh Hawley, I guarantee you otherwise would be a culture warrior on this subject. So that, I think, is the first principal point. That's why it excites me when I think about a state like Ohio or a state like Florida. Like, I want Marco Rubio to be in the position of being like, hey, bro, you got a $3 billion cannabis industry. So that's one thing. To your question of why do those states manage to be more successful, I mean, or seem to be more successful, I think the simple answer is, as we said before, the federal government makes it hard enough, right? Like, you need a state to be pretty chill to even have a fighting chance. When you can't deduct any taxes, when you can't use the banking system, it's impossible to run, and it's impossible to run a business legally. Red states, say what you want to say about them, right?
They're fiscally conservative.
When it comes to business, like, they may be intrusive, they may not like you saying the word gay, right? Like, they may not be down with drag queens, but right, when it comes to business, right, sometimes they're just like, all right, dude, like, we'll get out of your way. And in this, narrow context, like, that's helpful, right? If you're trying to run a cannabis business and you already got the federal government throwing darts at you, you don't need another.
Well, that's the challenge with cannabis, right? Because cannabis is one of those things where it's typically, a liberal thing, but you need policy and regulation. That is, I don't know if I should say conservative, but definitely like business like proper business etiquette. Like, it needs to be done the right way, and that's typically something that conservatives.
Totally. And here's so I agree with everything you just said. And I would also say, look, we live.
And I'm neither or. Totally. It's just interesting to hear.
I think I agree with everything you said. And I'll also say, like, look, we live in really polarized political times. We get it, right? We should try our best to prevent that from totally crippling our cannabis public policy conversation. What I mean by that is, we should compare these policy approaches that are going on in different states and have an honest conversation about whether certain policy choices are leading to their outcomes. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, we should be honest. We're like, okay, like, we want to ensure equity and diversity in the cannabis industry. The state that talked a big game about it, what actually happened? Like, we should treat this like a little bit more like a policy experiment and be a little bit less like ideological. It's not about showing everyone that we're the most pure. It's about like, okay, so, and let me give you a specific example. New Mexico does not have a social equity program. New Mexico also happens to have one of the more diverse cannabis industries in the country. Now, why is that? Because they make it pretty, they lower the barriers to participating in the industry, right? And so again, if I read about New Mexico cannabis businesses, they're often Latino, middle-class people, ex-veterans. I'm not saying the market's perfect, but we should at least be open to the idea that, like, you don't need to have the words equity in your policy, right? Maybe it's like you lower the taxes a little bit, right? And you lower the barriers to entry. So
I think equity gets misused a lot. I think the word gets used. That's why we don't like using it. We like using social impact. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We believe in equity. We believe in social equity of what the soul of what social equity is. But, these states and these municipalities have overused it and overabused it. And I think it's more about social impact.
Totally. And to your point, one thing I would ask you, in Connecticut, where you need $3 million to qualify for one of the social equity licenses, is that social equity, right? I mean, to your point, right?
What do you need to qualify for a regular one?
Right. I mean, I'm not making this up, right? Like, for this, it's like, yeah, you can get the social equity license, but you need like $3 million. And then it's so, to your point, there are ways in which these terms can start to mean less. And so, to your exact point, you said the word impact, and that's, I think, a different way of saying exactly what I'm trying to say, which is like, we should look at the outcomes of these different policy experiments. And so if in certain red states or purple states or green states or whatever, like, we're like, oh, wait, that's doing what we wanted. It's generating a healthy economy. There's diversity there. Then we should be open to those ideas.
It's interesting, man, because I've typically been more, left of center my whole life, right? Just, growing up in, lower income neighborhoods, hustling on the streets, hip hop industry, which is very, anti-establishment. Mm-hmm. You tend to be more left, liberal, left of center. But then when I got to college, I met a lot of really good people that were on the right. And then as I started to excel in business and entrepreneurship, I started meeting more and more business owners and learning about fiscal conservatism and this and that. And so like I've always been like a fiscal conservative, but a social liberal, right? And, you know, because I believe that we should help the folks that need help. I believe we should do things, right? But when we get, you know, hypothetically taxed 60 cents of my dollar, I'm not cool with that. But I'll give 10, 20 cents because we need to take care of our people. It's not just every man for himself either. Right. So then learning that and then building a business within the cannabis industry and then seeing how politicized these municipalities are and going from one state to another. I mean, it's like operating in multiple countries, working in multiple states here in America with cannabis. It's like, how do you do that? Like, how does, like, as a strategist, like, you know, how do you have the goal, the vision of being a multi-state owner, knowing what you know that it's like being in different countries in each state? How do you do it?
I mean, I think,
and I know that that's kind of existential, but
totally. I mean, first to your point about like, you know, growing up with left leanings and then moving to the right. I think the way I think about this in the context of cannabis is the harms of the war on drugs were a result of excessive state power, right? Like we empowered the government to do a ton of really fucked up shit and created all of these harms. Is giving the state a ton of power really the answer as we try to remedy those, right? So like what we went wrong because we gave a narrow group of people an immense amount of power to impact people's lives. And I wonder, right, in our effort to remedy these harms, we invest a lot of power in the state, but the state can still misuse that power in really significant ways. Maybe the answer is the state needs to let people, like, you know, live more free lives, right? And needs to stop trying to control them. So that's my thoughts on cannabis. You're right. It's difficult to operate in all of these different states, and you just have to like choose carefully, I suppose, right?
Like part of your strategy also needs to know, like you need to know, like policy wise in that state, what your strategy is going to be.
Totally.
It's why you had head of government affairs for these industries because of that very reason, right? So it's like, in addition to understanding supply chain or logistics or weather or terrain or transportation issues or whatever the issues are within real estate issues within the industry itself, you have to also deal with like this massively politicized thing that can go in this direction or in that direction from state to state, and it's tough, man.
It's tough, and it's a full-time job, I think, to understand it, like in all the states across the country and also in different countries around the world, like Western Europe. And people who run cannabis businesses do not have the time to pay attention to all of those nuances. And so I suppose my business, or a big part of it,
that's where you come in.
Is just really understanding it with, like, as you said, with granularity and, you know, likely with some intelligence about how it's going to develop as a result of a certain market structure. Presumably there's a pattern matching thing where you recognize how, you know, balances of supply and demand may impact pricing, for example, so you can help different kinds of actors make informed decisions about where they should engage.
So I come to you, I'm a pretty big business. I want to open up in this state or this country. I come to Ananda and I say, hey, like, what do we need to do to really enter this market? And then you go and you do all the research, you do the strategy, you say, okay, kind of like when you go to buy a house, you need to know what the school districts are, how far is the closest post office. I mean, that's minimizing it, but it's a lot more than that. But going and really seeing what the different terrain is within that industry and say, okay, boom, this is what it is. You're going to have a problem with maybe permitting in this state versus, you know, the city. Totally. Or versus the state. Is that kind of how?
Yeah. I mean, that's right.
In addition to business, but like that side of the game.
You're right. And I'll give you a few simple examples, right? It's working with leading retailers in California to figure out where they should open up stores and helping them do that. So, you know, like for example, I helped, you know, Airfield store that's going to open up in Redwood City in a couple months, help them win that license, right? 2 of the 3 licenses in Ventura, Wheelhouse and the Artistry, help them win those.
Nice.
So that's one piece of it. And another piece of it is, as you said, helping brands that may have equity in California think about what other states that they should enter. I built a great brand in California. It's a very harsh climate. How do I think intelligently about what other states I want to move into? Which market structures set themselves up for my success? You know, so.
And what are some of your successes that you feel happy about? Like, I know you just said those 3 dispensaries that you helped get, but what are some other like projects you got going on? Or I don't know if you could talk about your clients, but like, what are some of the, you know, projects you're working on right now that you'd like to share?
Totally. I'll tell you the one that I'm most proud of, which is from a few years ago, was working on the Arizona ballot initiative in 2020.
Okay.
Right. So this was the initiative that legalized cannabis in Arizona. It was the first red state to legalize cannabis, so that was dope. Also, if you remember in 2020, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by like a few thousand votes in Arizona. And that cannabis ballot measure likely made the difference in terms of turnout, which even members of Congress said. So if you remember that really contested election.
Oh, yeah.
Trump probably wins that state, right, if that ballot measure were not on the ballot. So it was cool to be involved in drafting that ballot measure, thinking through the strategy and making sure it wasn't going to get like repealed by the Supreme Court. So that was cool to work on that ballot measure. The project that I've worked on most recently that I think is cool is I worked with two testing labs, two of the bigger testing labs in the country, SC Labs, and which is I'm on the board of, and I love working with them, and ACT Labs, and I wrote their trust in testing manual, right? So they developed a detailed document about what best practices in testing look like. And I know this is really wonky, but if the legal market is going to have credibility, the testing infrastructure has to work.
1,000%. New York has a horrible testing problem right now.
Exactly. Right?
Yes.
Like, why should I buy legally if like what you're telling me is inaccurate on this label?
100%.
It should be like nutrition facts, right? If it's BS, then it undermines the credibility of the legal market.
As well as also efficiencies in business when it comes to testing. You can't be putting your stuff into testing and not getting it back for 6 weeks.
Right. Exactly. Right. And I mean that is also a lot of where what separates businesses is if they can turn this around quickly. So,
right.
Anyways, you can read this online. It's a really detailed document. Basically, I interviewed the leading scientists at both of those two companies and was like, all right, guys, like let's develop this manifesto. And it's called the Trusting Testing Manifesto that touches on pesticide testing, microbiologicals, and identifies what the key tests are, what the standard deviations should be for acceptable error.
Nice.
And again, I'm not a scientist, but they were like, okay, we want you to interview all of these people, distill this information, and produce this document, which we're going to present at conferences. And so it's a good example of, you don't have to know everything, but if you can understand the goals of these actors and help them distill their ideas and see where it fits into their business strategy, right? These companies, it is part of their strategy to establish themselves as best-in-class operators, right? I mean, they want the MSOs to say, okay, how do I guarantee consistent product experience in these 20 states that I operate in? I fuck with like these labs that know what they're doing and have consistent practices across these states, right? That's the professionalization of the industry that will come. So
good for you.
Yeah, it was dope. So
that's dope, man. That's a different side of the industry. People don't think about testing, but it's very, very important. I got a really good friend from college that's in the testing business, but for like genetic testing. In Arkansas and a few other states. And he was sharing with me like just how important testing is and just seeing this industry and seeing how people pay to play and all these other like faulty things. And it's like, well, then what? You got to have like an honorable testing system. Otherwise, like who's testing the testers?
Totally. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And like, that's key for, an agricultural element that if we're really thinking about this, the long-term effects of growing cannabis. Well, what if you were growing tomatoes for 20 years with pesticides that are bad for you? Like that has a effect on society. So like we need to make sure that our testing is solid when it comes to the cannabis industry, just for our future growth of health with this plant.
Super important.
Agreed. So, well, that's dope, man. Well, we're getting towards the end, man. I just I appreciate you coming out here, Hirsh, man. It's always love, always respect. We're going to cut this up. Is there anybody else that you want to talk about or any upcoming projects? Please, let folks know, obviously, how they can find you too, but like what they can look for you over the next 6 months.
I guess I would just say this. One of the things that I really try to do is put out information about how the state landscape is developing in this country. So if anyone is interested in that, that's what they can expect out of me. Like I record podcasts often that go into what's happening in these different states and why I think Ohio coming online is important and how many Americans will live in an adult use state and which senators live in these states.
Where can they find that at?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter. Ananda Strategy is
the podcast?
My handle. These podcasts are on Twitter, and I appear on a bunch of different podcasts, again, to talk through these policy things. But I think Twitter's probably the best place. I mean, I just regularly post my thoughts on what's going on in different states and, what this data about the Michigan market means. And I don't know if people mess with Twitter, but there's a great cannabis community on there. So my handle there is Ananda Strategy. So it's ANANDA Strategy. That's probably the best place, and that'll show you whenever I put out content. So anyways, if that's your jam, I think it's super interesting to see what's happening as this wave of legalization sweeps the country. And and I enjoy talking about it. So
You know, it's interesting with legalization because at the same time too, like I want legalization, but the first thing that I want is decriminalization. Like real decriminalization, not the bullshit. You know, I mean, we're taking strides and steps, and you know what Biden did with the the thing that he did recently, but it's just the pardons, but it's just for simple possession. Yep. Yes, that is bullshit in a sense, but it's also not because it sets a precedent, and it sets a precedent of him doing that with no real help from his. From the party. Like that was an initiative that they pushed on their, that the White House pushed on their own. So it's like what he did and when he decided to do it. Cause both, as you know, both sides are not really for legalization in the sense of like the way the industry is, right? You know, no one will really take it on for real. Right. And you know, that's a challenge that we're trying to figure out on how to make that happen. But, I'm blessed that I get to grow in the, sorry, this is L'Oreal. I'm blessed that I get to grow in this industry. I get to take part in it after serving time for it. I get to be around folks like you who are on the front lines of the policy making side of it. And I think if we all work together in a good solid way, we could form a Voltron and we could get this thing done. But it's more than just legalization. It's about decriminalization and making sure that no one goes to prison for this stuff. Yeah. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's about health, criminal justice, and stronger communities. That's what this is about, right? Like we want people to have healthier lives. We don't want people to be in prison, like unjustifiably. And ideally, we want to create an economy around these things. And yeah, also not destroy the environment. Probably those are the four things. Yeah.
Exactly. So really, my buddy from Sweet Leaf Collective, he says health equity. Yeah. You know, we focus a lot on social equity, but not health equity. Yeah. So health equity is another one. But yeah, man, I'm just thankful to be blessed, man. Get to do what we do. Get to party here. I'm surprised one of my cannabis prisoner homies hasn't called. Usually when I'm on live or I'm on a panel, I get a phone call because we get called all the time. But thanks for coming out, man. And you know, if anybody really wants to take their business to the next level, you know, make sure you reach out to Hirsh at Ananda Strategy, man. Just good guy. Willing to, you know, chop it up with you, help you with whatever it is you got going. And then when it's time to do it, you sign on that dotted line and you hire his firm because he's going to help you get there. But anyways, other than that, man, if there's anything else you want to say or let the people know, please do. Or
this was awesome. I really enjoyed this. This was super dope. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed just riffing with you on this. Like, yeah, this was awesome.
I love that you went to Harvard, bro. Like, I'm really fascinated by that. And like with Suits, it's all about Harvard, bro, and like I'm involved in that, dude. No, but I have this regret, dude. I don't have a regret. Let me phrase it, but I have this quasi regret that I started hustling at 18 years old. It taught me everything. I traveled the entire country on my own at 18, 19 years old. I traveled the world. But I ended up having to go to prison a lot. And so I fucked up my normal opportunity of climbing the corporate ladder. So now I'm in a position where either I'm a grunt or I'm an entrepreneur. I don't get to go to work at the bank and work my way up, and I don't have that opportunity, right? I fucked that up for myself. And the quasi regret is that I feel I could have succeeded very, very well at the Harvards and the corporate way and the corporate ladders and all that, because I'm seeing it. I'm like, 90% of these people out here don't got a fucking clue. Yeah, facts. You get what I'm saying? And like,
sure, it just goes to show
it's about relationships and culture and like knowing how to get around and having common sense and having that real education, not just book education, but like real, you know, intuitive education that you get at the Harvards and the different places of the world. But like, I wish I could have gone to Harvard, bro, or one of those types of schools and gone that route. But then I'm like,
here you are now.
But then would I have sharpened my blade going that direction? Right. You know what I mean? So it's like one of those things. Like I always think, what if? So, you know, big shout out Harvard. I really respect that. That's something that is not easy to do. Getting a master's degree is not easy to do, or Juris Doctorate in your sense. Doing it at Harvard is even harder. And so like I really respect that, man. Like that took a commitment from you, that you didn't quit, that you kept going. And I think that's something that is something to say about your character too. And, you know, since I met you, you've always smiled and had an open dialogue with me, and you never judged or nothing like that, you know, so I really appreciate that. And so thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for representing Tons Talk. And anytime that, you know, anything we could do from our side, you got us, man, whether it's washing windows or working in the conference room.
Thanks, Anthony. And I'll just say, hey, man, I learned from everybody in this space, yourself included. And that's the thing, right? We can talk about someone's skill set. They went to some school, which is great, but I've learned a tremendous amount from thousands of people, and that's why I'm here, right? There's all these people with all these life experiences. And so, anyways, thanks.
Straight up, man. Big shout out, Life Experiences, man. Well, thank you for another episode of Tons Talk. I'm Anthony with 40 Tons. Big shout out to Hemper. Big shout out to Owl's Oil. Much love to my guys over at Josh Wax. And if you're looking for awesome graphics, you've seen 40 Tons of social media. We post almost every single day and have for 2 years. All those graphics, all those videos, all those everything. You know that we're all about content. Reach out to High-End Graphics for 50% off. Let them know 40 Tons sent you. And if you're looking for some quality video production, you might be able to get him, but he's very, very busy. But it's Steven with, oh, that's filthy. And we're signing out. Much love.
Now I put money on your books until the day that you sent this up. One nigga Covain said he living life after life. For all the homies on the bunks that was talking night after night.